Like 10 Productions, Houston. Will we on the West Coast see collapsing buildings like in Turkey during a shallow earthquake? Even with the advancements in retrofitting, are we toast? This was a mattress. Yes. It won't be on the same scale, but we will see it. Yeah. So, okay. And I will use the best examples I know, which is Seattle. So, gotta leave where we were in Mexico here. Keep scrolling out. Go north, my friend. Okay. So, the Seattle fault, which is like the shallow quake fault, like what they had in Turkey. It's hard to see the Seattle fault here, but it runs basically through this property here. I can bring up a satellite photo of it, or a lidar photo. One sec. I gotta go. Lidar, Cambridge, Island. Images. Okay, here we go. So the toe jam fault, which is the Seattle fault, you can oops, come back. Here we go. So you can see this little fault line here that goes across the island. It's a little hard to see probably on your screen, but this is the Seattle fault coming to the surface here, and I lived a little bit north of here for a while, and we had several quakes in like 2016 that were deep on this fault. So not the surface part of the fault, but like 15 miles down. The whole series, like 1,000 quakes, and everyone's like, "Oh shit, is Seattle fault gonna go?" And then it didn't. But if we go back to the Google Earth, okay, go back to the Google Earth here. Oh, sorry, the toe jam fault was on this. I was looking at the wrong part. Toe jam fault goes basically through right about here, and it starts. The fault line itself starts under the Olympic Mountains, runs like under Bainbridge Island. Part of it surfaces at Blakely Rock here, which is this little rock that's just off the island. Runs under the island, under downtown Seattle, right underneath Lumen Field, which is where the Seahawks play, and under Lake Washington, out into the Cascade Mountains out here. And it's a pretty long fault. Most of it's at the surface. And the last time it went probably between a 7.5 and an 8.0. And the damage it caused, about 900 years ago, the damage it caused was absolutely catastrophic. We are talking. We had a landslide from Newcastle. So this is a hill here in Newcastle. It's, I don't know, about 1,000 feet tall. There was a landslide where the entire slope gave way and everything kind of like the slope just kind of like turned, and just all the trees are upright and everything. Hit Lake Washington, caused a 600-foot tsunami inside of Lake Washington, mega tsunami. And you can go into Lake Washington, and the bottom of the lake is fairly anoxic, like not too much oxygen. So everything's fairly well preserved. And 600 feet down the bottom of the lake, because it's a really deep lake, you can find upright trees still, completely petrified from 900 years ago. During that event, the south end of Bainbridge Island here was uplifted about 30 to 60 feet out of the water. And where the really, really, really rich people are, the country club here, Restoration Point, it's like all old Weyerhaeuser money, Nordstrom money, whatever. This sucker was underwater, popped up out. This caused a giant tsunami throughout all of Puget Sound, wiping out shorelines, just killing probably native tribes, all sorts of stuff 900 years ago. Absolutely brutal. Okay, so we know that huge actions can happen from the fault itself, as you know, these workings happen. But in a modern age, we have a lot of buildings that are built extremely well to handle big shakes. One of the first modern buildings to be built with this in mind was the Space Needle. Space Needle itself, 605 feet tall. Its center of gravity is 3/4 of an inch off the ground. So it's supposed to be able to handle a gigantic quake. It'd be like one of those, you know, weighted boxing dummies that you punch and goes whoop, and it pops right back up again. That's the way that the center of gravity works on the Space Needle. Cool, modern, whatever. And then the Columbia Center, which is the tallest building in Seattle. This one here, we'll do a relief of the Columbia Center for us. No, it won't. But it is 954 feet tall, 946 feet tall, 76 stories, whatever it is, almost 1,000 feet tall. It was built in 84, and every fourth floor is on a set of wheels, so that if there's a massive quake, the building, rather than getting this incredible torsion on the base, just goes chunk, 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 chunk. These things are awesome, and a lot of modern buildings are built with all these little gimmicks and devices in there to handle super big quakes. The problem is areas like Pioneer Square, which is sort of an older preserved part of town. The International District is our Chinatown. And these are all like brick masonry buildings. And the whole reason these things are brick masonry buildings was that when Seattle was founded, we were a mud people. Like this was all like tidewater, mud, grossness, just slop. They put some posts in the ground and build over it because it was where cheap poor people would go. And a lot of the hills, Seattle's built on seven pretty giant hills that are several hundred feet tall each. And a lot of them were kind of impassable, had really steep grades. And so what they did was they did what are called regrades. They just took giant shovels and just got rid of the hills. And they've used hoses and they hosed the entire hill down into the bay. And so a lot of downtown Seattle, the seawall, this was all tidelands. This was all filled in with diggings from like Beacon Hill. They got rid of Denny Hill entirely. So where Amazon is based out here in South Lake Union, this was a giant hill. They just got rid of the whole hill. It's gone. It's basically just sea level across that entire hill. And they took that dirt and they made the seawall. They filled all this in. They made Harbor Island, which was at one time the largest man-made island in the entire world. It was since passed by the Tokyo airport, which has been since passed by the Palm Islands in Dubai. And they filled all this in with a whole bunch of jiggly sand and sawdust because the Yesler mill was here. Remember, Seattle was all like timber. People just logged timber and then sent the timber to places. And in 1889, June 6th, 89, I think, there's a Great Seattle Fire. And Seattle just burned down. All these beautiful wood buildings and scummy wood buildings all just burned to the ground. It was like 1,200 buildings gone. And so Seattle introduced, you can no longer build buildings with wood. You have to build buildings with masonry, stuff that's fireproof. And so this whole old area of downtown Seattle, built since 1889, is all brick. And all that unreinforced masonry likes to fall apart during huge earthquakes. And Seattle's done a pretty good job retrofitting all these buildings. There was a lot of grants offered after the Nisqually quake in 2001, because a lot of the facades just crashed and crushed cars and almost killed people and stuff. So now they run these incredibly long torsion bars through the buildings and hold the buildings together, like tighten them up. So if you look at these brick buildings, you can see these like circular disc plates with big nuts. And that's because there's a cable or a bar that runs through the length of the entire building, holding it together to keep it from swaying back and forth. And for the most part, you go through Seattle, you'll see almost every building now has had that done. The problem is you get to Portland, down here in the south, where they've not had a big quake in a long time. They have like 1,600 buildings that have not been retrofitted at all in their downtown area. And so they've got, if a huge subduction zone quake happens, you're looking at probably 1,000 buildings completely leveled, just like in Turkey. They're going to be older buildings. They're going to be buildings built probably between 1880 and 1950. In Turkey, the big problem was that while there were zoning regulations and building codes, those were never enforced. And the code enforcers oftentimes get bribed or just paid to look the other way, whatever. And those buildings all just collapsed because they weren't built to code, because it's cheaper to just build something, get someone in there and piss off, right? The thing about building codes is that they definitely change how a city will look. If we go here, we can go Taiwan quake 1999 images. Okay, so in Taiwan, we had tons of buildings. So Taipei had this huge earthquake in 1999. Tons of buildings, just the first floor would collapse and the building would tip over on its side. And so many of these buildings just tipped over on their side. Just building after building after building after building, tipped over, tipped over, tipped over, completely fell on its side, tipped over, tipped over, tipped over, and like huge modern buildings. These things were not old construction. Like these are pretty modern building, and they just fell over, just like timber, building after building after building after building. And what the Taiwanese learned was that their building codes needed to have stricter rules for the ground floor. So a big thing that the buildings in Taiwan uh, uh, had were these huge, large, grand lobbies. And so the floor plan would be very open, maybe with a few posts and pillars supporting the rest of the building, but there's no shear strength. There was no walls connecting everything together because you wanted this big, open, grand, welcome to my building type entry. And when the earthquake happened, it went chunk, 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 chunk of collapse and just snapped those little pilings that the building was on. The whole thing would just tip over and fall. And so what they've learned is you can't have a very grand lobby in these buildings without creating something like walls between them to shore up any shear problems that might happen. And so since then, Taiwan has rebuilt. They built with new building codes to handle these earthquakes. In Kyoto 95, Kyoto quake 1995. You can see the same problem not having torsion strength when like these elevated highways tip over, because you're just on a spindly little thing and gets one snap, punk, the weight throws it the other way. Another problem with a lot of buildings, see if we can find a good picture here. Okay, so you can see these terracotta roofs, these tiles on these old style terracotta roofs. They're beautiful, they're classic. The problem is that with timber construction, you're putting like thousands upon thousands upon thousands upon thousands upon thousands upon thousands of pounds of weight above your timber construction. So if there's any side to side jiggling, that weight gets thrown around, the leverage on that post snaps and the whole building collapses. And so there's now rules in Japan about what type of strength your wood construction has to be able to have these beautiful terracotta roofs. And tons and tons and tons of these older homes with these beautiful terracotta shingles all collapsed basically do that exact result, is that weight was getting thrown around back and forth and just snapped and collapsed. So going back to the Northwest, we've got these surface faults that run everywhere. And when these surface faults go, we talked about the show the other day during the charity show for Turkey, is when the earthquake's at the surface, you feel it so much. The 7.0 or 6.9, whatever it was, we had the Nisqually quake. So the Nisqually Delta is down here between Tacoma and Olympia. And the Nisqually quake was a 7 point something. It was 48 miles below the surface, and it destroyed buildings in Seattle, which is 37 miles away, right, from where the Nisqually quake was. And so you can think about it like 37 away, 48 down, do the hypotenuse of that triangle, and it's, quick math. How far away was that quake actually? Oh crap, I closed my calculator. Calculator. There we go. Come on. Turn off the Google Earth. Turn off the Chrome. Got the calculator. So 48 times 48 equals that. Plus 37 times 107 there. And then we got to do square root. There's my square root function on here. Mod, trigonomic log. There is square root 60. So basically 60 miles away was that quake, if you look at it that way. And so, but in Turkey, the quake was 0 miles away because it was at the surface. And then if Seattle gets a Seattle fault quake like that, it'll be the same thing. It'll be the same strength right at the surface, and it will rumble for probably 2.5 minutes, and it'll be gnarly. The other big quake we're watching out for is a subduction zone quake, which we pointed out before, with this tiny little remnant of an ancient oceanic plate called the Juan de Fuca plate. And there's a spreading ridge. This is a volcanic ridge that goes along here where the Earth is splitting open, trying to separate itself from the rest of the Pacific plate. But then as it does so, North America is moving over it and gobbling it up. And it's diving, it's the subduction zone right here, where it's diving underneath the continent. And then where it gets remelted and turned into cascade volcanoes. This subduction zone here has not had a meaningful earthquake since January 26th, 1700. And there's a couple reasons why we know that. One is that there was what's called an orphan tsunami recorded in Japan on that date, on January 27th. So about 14 hours after the quake hit, a random tsunami just came and just wiped out all these villages along the Japanese coast. The Japanese were like, what the hell? Where'd that come from? Well, found out it came from here, from right along our coast. And we were able to match that. The scientists did some really cool stuff. So up here in Copalis Beach on the coast, in this estuary area are these dead forests. And these like white trees that kind of just stand up, and there's kind of boggy thing, and they're just dead. And what they found was all those trees died on the same day. So all along this coastline are these like weird dead trees that are found in certain spots. And when they dug down beneath the trees, they found a weird layer of muck. And they took that muck out and they carbon dated it. And it dated to 1700. And all the trees, you carbon date the trees themselves, they all died in the exact same day in 1700. And went, oh my gosh, that orphan tsunami in Japan was the same day all these trees died. All these trees died when the ocean flooded in from a giant tsunami and killed them all. So we know that was the last time we had a giant quake like that. Plus, you talk to tribal elders, they could say, "Oh yes, my great grandfather would talk about how the earth rumbled for 10 minutes or whatever." And so there's oral history matching all that for the tribes in the Northwest. So a quake along this zone can be one of two kinds. It can be like a pinpointed location, and it'll rumble for 5 minutes at a 8.5 or something, which would be terrible. Or it can rip the entire length from north of Vancouver Island all the way to was it Mendocino or something here in California, and and it can rupture the entire length of this thing. Just go crack 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 all the way down, and that could be upwards 10-15 minute long quake at a 9.0 to 9.5. That would cause localized tsunamis anywhere from 10 to 20 meters tall. Could run a mile or two inland, wipe out every community along the coast. It would send tsunamis across to Alaska, Aleutian Islands, Japan, Hawaii. It would be absolutely gnarly. And the shaking would be so long that just fatigue would set in for a lot of the sheer strength of buildings. And even if you are, like, Seattle's like 200 miles away from the 139 miles away from the subduction zone, and that thing would probably be about 10-15 miles down, so 150 miles away. It would still rumble at the equivalent of probably a 7.0 for 5 to 15 minutes. And it would level a lot. It would take out bridges. It would take all sorts of things. And we're about due for a subduction zone quake. Looking at geologic record, they happen once every 250 to 300 years, and we're at 323 years as of this year since the last one of those. And of subduction zones, so you can see the subduction zones all over. There's like big long one along the Aleutians, along Kamchatka, Japan, down through Marianas Trench, and off the Philippines. We got big ones in Sumatra. We got ones off of Papua New Guinea, New Zealand, all the way down in South America, along Central America and South America. Every single solitary subduction zone off here, where we've got Dominican Republic and Haiti. We've had a subduction zone quake in every single solitary subduction zone since 2004, since the Indonesian tsunami, except here. We've had almost no budging whatsoever in 25 years. No quakes of any concern, nothing. And they think this thing is so locked that when it does go, it's going to rip the entire zone. It's going to be huge. Because normally you get, a little quake here, a little quake there, showing some sort of movement. But it's so locked up that like nothing's budged or moved, which means when that happens, right along the coast, you get all these little hills that get built. And if you ever make your way through Aberdeen and Hoquiam, if you drive out to the coast in Washington for some reason, as you enter Aberdeen, there's these hillsides right along the road that are ancient sand dunes, old beach sand dunes. You can kind of see them right here. There's this road cut into this kind of semi-lithified sand, and you can see what are probably tsunami events. You can see it right here. Look at this. Do you see these dark lines right here in the sand? These lines right here are very likely tsunami events that happened hundreds of years ago. And this sand dune isn't necessarily windswept sand. A lot of it is built up from the pressure of that plate diving underneath and wrinkling the coastline. And it's really crazy to look at. If you ever get a chance, like pull over the side of the road and just kind of stare at this guy as you come into Aberdeen. And you can see like the evidence of ancient tsunamis. There's probably several thousand years ago, a few hundred years after that, a few hundred years after that, and so on. And as the ocean water comes in, just deposits a new layer of soil on this stuff. And you can see it from Google Earth. A Google satellite made a relief drawing and pinpointed, you can see the tsunami evidence over the years in this sandy hillside. That is cool. I love that. Oh man. That's blowing my mind that I can see that from Google Earth. So long story short, when the earthquake happens, when the subduction earthquake happens, Aberdeen's gone, Westport's gone, Ocean Shore's gone, Ocean Park's gone, Long Beach is gone, Astoria probably gone, all along Seaside, Manzanita, Rockaway Beach, a lot of these places, Tillamook Bay, gone. A lot of these places, like you do have coastal range mountains that are very close to shore, so you want to run uphill as fast as you can. But if you are in Pacific City and you can't get to that hill fast enough, you're toast. There's nothing that's going to withstand the wall of water that's going to come in. It's going to wash all the way up these river valleys, probably get up to places like Beaver and further, and get stopped probably when they get into these canyons here. You'll find fishing boats dropped off 5 miles inland on these things. It's going to be gnarly. And you're hoping if it does happen, it's going to happen in the wintertime. Simply because people won't be on the shore as much. Like in the summer, people vacation down there and they're enjoying the beach, and there'll be 200,000, 300,000, 400,000 more people than during the winter. But like where I am on Bainbridge, we'll probably lose the ferry boat. We'll probably lose the bridge. The bridge was built in the 50s. It's a piece of trash. Our tiny little spindly bridge here, like everything's cracked and rusted, and I bet it's got a D rating from the government. And then the ferry terminal will be gone, so we'll be trapped. We'll just be eating each other. That's the way it's going to go. So there you go. There's some earthquake stuff about the Northwest for you. I'm still blown away that I could see the lines from the tsunamis on Google Earth. That's awesome. At WebTwerp, yep. When a big overdue earthquake hits Seattle, say goodbye to a good chunk of downtown. Yeah. The other thing I forgot to talk about, all that fill, because they dug out these hills and then put it down there, is that fill jiggles. Whereas if you're built on a solid rock, earth goes chunk, 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 and then ends. But if you are in fill between those solid rocks, it's like jello. So the earth goes chunk, 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 chunk. The rock stops, but the fill in between goes slurper, 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 and will keep jiggling for a significant period of time afterwards. And with that fill, you get liquefaction. So the sand turns into basically a liquid, because it's like having particles that move just like you do in water or anything else. And so everything will try to achieve its natural buoyancy. And so what happens is buildings sink into that stuff and get torn apart that way. You can look up liquefaction videos on YouTube. They're awesome. You can see cool ones. Like my favorite one I saw is they had two big glass jars. One, they put ping pong balls at the bottom filled with sand. The other, they filled with sand and put like metal ball bearings on top. And then they took like literally like a Hitachi vibrator and attached it to the jar, and all the sand goes bzzz, and the steel balls sunk and the ping pong balls floated. So it achieved its natural buoyancy. Once the particles start moving, everything wants to be buoyant. It's the entire premise behind like concrete vibrators and a lot of like gold classification systems. They have vibration tables to classify gold out of material because the heavy stuff will sink and the light stuff will float to the top. So that's what will happen in places like downtown Seattle that's made of sawdust and sand, is that everything will just sink